faith that was handed down by the apostles. So he started with St. Athanasius, who he studied all his life. Even when he was a man near 80, he brought out a new translation. Athanasius was the great man for the Creed. We'll say more of him later. He read copiously from Augustine and all the other fathers, trying to find out what was the basic of Christianity. And with, I won't go on too long, of course, he started then with a group of friends to try and lead a Catholic life as far as history allowed. Therefore, they began to say the breviary. They got hold of breviaries, and 13 or more of them said the breviary. Then after that, he began to practice communion. He used to have daily communion when he was the vicar of St. Mary's. Not many people came, but he began it, and he began trying to bring confession in, because he found among the ancient fathers that the forgiveness of sins was a sacrament. So he built up a kind of halfway house, the Via Media, a halfway house to Rome, hating Rome and thinking it totally corrupt. And he wrote his famous tracts, and then when he was about 43 or so, he wrote his tract 90, which caused a great offence in Oxford because they thought he was being Romanized. And Newman had very great doubts, so he retired from the Episcopalian Church. It's a very moving and sad tale. He preached his last sermon, he preached 600 at the university, drawing as many as 500 undergraduates and young graduates every Sunday. One of the best preachers probably of the century. But now he preached his last sermon at Littlemore, where I live. There he'd built a little chapel of ease for the villagers 3 miles outside Oxford. His mother laid the foundation stone, and he pontificated there. When he came to say goodbye, he preached his thing, The Parting of Friends. And the little church was jammed with all his friends in Oxford, many very well distinguished writers, professors, etc. They were all in tears. And when he finished his sermon, he removed his Master of Arts gown and hung it on the communion rails and ceased to be a minister of the Church of England. Then he found the place where I now live. It had been a coaching station, where the coach from Oxford to Cambridge was kept, and the horses. Now the railroad had just arrived, and so it was all falling to pieces. So he leased this place, and where the horses, the barn was his library, and all the grooms' cottages and a few horse boxes, he joined them all together and made 13 rooms and a little quadrangle. And they had a chapel. It has no windows. It's not as big as the sacristy here. And they had no Blessed Sacrament, of course, and they had a cross without a figure. And there these 13 men lived for 3 years. And Cardinal Newman's room is the last one, and I've now got the room that Father Stanton occupied. They all became Catholics eventually, and all but one were ordained priests. Cardinal Newman eventually couldn't go on. He waited and waited. He couldn't be sure. He hated Rome, and on the other hand, he knew more and more that the Episcopal Church was not true. One of his young undergraduate friends living there, who became Father Lockhart, the Rosminian, went to Newman one day and asked to go to confession. And he said to Newman, "Do you think you can forgive me?" And Newman said, "No, you better go to Dr. Pusey." Dr. Pusey didn't become a Catholic, but Newman did, and Newman suddenly realized, "I'm not a priest." And he had a terrible time, parted with all his family and all his friends. His sister wouldn't write to him. To become a Roman in those days was appalling. He hardly knew a Catholic in the whole of his life up to then. Well, eventually, St. Blessed Dominic Barbary came, an Italian who could hardly speak English, blew in, and Newman knelt down and said he'd like to go to confession and be received into the true church. That's just outside my room. I can see the place where he went to confession. They had no altar, so they went to his study and took the great lectern that he used, a great big thing like we use here, which he always wrote standing. So they brought it into the chapel and pushed it down flat, and Father Barbary said Mass there, and Newman and 3 of his friends received their first communion. The others were ordained elsewhere. But I still use that altar. It's got no cover, and it was used 100 and something years ago, 1845. Newman was 45 when he became a Catholic. That was his second stage, one step enough for me. Of course, he had to leave this place. It belonged to the Church of England, so his little retreat house stood empty for 100 years, and now recently was bought back by his own order, the Oratorians. But he went to Rome, became a priest, and then lived the rest of his life in Birmingham. He was a major flop in the Catholic Church. The greatest man of his day. He lost all his Church of England friends by being a Catholic, and then, sadly enough, he lost a great many of his friends who became converts, thought him too broad-minded. They became fanatical. Father Faber and the future Cardinal Manning were more Roman than the Pope. And old Newman, who'd led them all, sat in the background. He wrote his 3 famous books, and nearly every job he did was a failure. He first went to Ireland and tried to start the university there at the request of the Irish hierarchy, and that failed completely after 7 years. Then he began to translate the Bible, and then he heard that you were starting the Baltimore translation over here, so he scrapped his. And his 3 famous books, the Apologia, etc., they brought great friends to him later, but at the time, he went through a terrible time in the true church, not really regarded as a spent force. And then the most amazing thing happened, which is well worth praying when we think of one step enough for me. Father Barbary, after he had received Cardinal Newman into the church, went to Belgium immediately for a meeting of the Passionist order of which he was a distinguished member. And another strange convert, Father Spencer, who became a Passionist and is very closely related to the lady who Prince Charles is marrying in a few weeks' time, Father Ignatius Spencer and Father Barbary went to Brussels, and they met the papal nuncio, quite a young man, Monsignor Pecci. And they said to him, "We've just received the most remarkable man into the church." Well, nothing happened, and Pecci became Bishop of Viterbo, I think, or somewhere, and nothing was heard for 30 years. And then Pecci was elected Pope, Pope Leo XIII. And when his secretary said to him in 1878, what's your reign going to be distinguished for? Pecci said, "Wait till you see my first list of cardinals." And at the very top of the list of cardinals was Father Newman. He wasn't even a Monsignor. He was just Father Newman, suddenly found himself made a cardinal. And his last 10 years, there he was, a cardinal of the Roman Church, and all his friends came back. When he died, I was amazed to see the London Times had the whole spread. They couldn't have done more for Queen Victoria. His life, he was the most outstanding man, and of course we've now got to the stage where at the last council of the church, nearly all the bishops from Australia and Fiji and God, all the ones I met, all kept on talking about Newman's council. The documents of the council and the development in the church largely came from him. Well, having given you the verse he wrote as a Protestant, "One step enough for me, lead kindly light amidst the encircling gloom," then he wrote as a Catholic a beautiful hymn which you could also meditate on. "Praise to the holiest in the height, and in the depth be praised, in all his words most wonderful, most sure in all his ways." A great scholar once told me he thought that was the most beautiful use of an adjective in the English language when Newman said of God, "most sure." If you were to go away in the garden and think over your life as far as it's got, and thank God for what's good in it, not always be looking for mortal sins, like a hen on a dunghill, the great thing is you take the first words, "one step enough for me," and then you take the words he wrote as a Catholic, "most sure in all his ways." He was an old man when he wrote that in The Dream of Gerontius. And it makes a very, very good beginning to a retreat for us all to meditate for ourselves. We only want to see the next step. None of us have the faintest idea how long our life will last or how it will end. We are not even sure that we'll be holy. We may lapse. We may have tragedies, illness, etc. But the great thing Newman teaches me is that one step is all you need, and also that God is totally sure, as in the case of St. Paul, where he changed a man right round, or in the case of Newman himself, extraordinary change from being an evangelical and then an Anglican and then a failure in the Catholic Church and then a cardinal. It's amazing how certain God is and how remarkably he keeps the balance. It's rather sad that for the last 100 years the Anglicans all sing Lead Kindly Light, but we won't, because it was written when he was a Protestant, and we sing Praise to the Holiest and they won't sing it because he wrote it as a Catholic. But now I'm glad to say those days are over, and now his hymns are sung. Lead Kindly Light is sung, I don't know why, at football games, in all the big soccer matches that they sing it. Perhaps one step enough for me is what each side wants. So therefore we'll think of that, and then we'll go on in the retreat after this to take today, say 4 or 5 of Newman's sermons. I picked them out for my own sake, because holiness was the thing he mentioned as a little boy. His great master said, the holiness rather than peace. And so our first talk will be on holiness, which you and I don't very often think about. And yet it runs right through nearly all his books, this concept. Then we'll take 1 or 2 of the sermons like that, and then we'll come tomorrow to his greatest part he played in the church in the incarnation of our blessed Lord. So that therefore, that would be the program. I would like you then now, we're free, and I'd like you very much to go out into the garden and think over your own life, asking God to show you just how your life has worked out till now. It's not bound to be a failure all the time, because it's been a failure up to now. One of the most remarkable priests I've seen in my life was an alcoholic and had DTs and was in total disgrace when he was 66. I know him well. He's in America. Now he's doing more than I've ever known any priest to do in charity to help those who got troubles with drink, that all his own sufferings were necessary to him. He said to me that I never intended to commit a sin ever. I never knew I was alcoholic. You always felt I can overcome this. Now that I find I can't, now if I drank it would be a mortal sin. But all those years, and it's how strange we all are. So you can have a marriage that fails, you can have a thing like alcoholism, you can have bad health all your life, or you can be like Mother Teresa, who started, after all, in Yugoslavia. How the hell she got to India, I can't make out. And then she taught in a school for most of her life. And then finally, when you come down at the end, you get Newman himself saying of God, most sure in all his ways.